Most people who take a probiotic never feel it working. That's not the brand's fault. Bacteria need food waiting when they arrive. Without it, they pass straight through you. Stanford proved this. 10 weeks, 2 groups, one on high fiber, one on fermented foods. The high fiber group barely moved. The fermented group dropped 19 inflammation markers. 19. Your gut runs 2 jobs. Feed the good bacteria, starve the bad ones out directly. Most people only ever do one. Some do neither. 14 foods, both jobs covered. Most already sitting in your kitchen. Number 8 on this list costs nothing. You've been throwing it away every spring. Number 4 changes completely after one step most people skip right after cooking. Nearly all 14 people use exactly backwards. Let's fix that. Garlic. A whole bulb of it does 2 jobs most people think only a supplement can do. Inside every clove sits a fiber called inulin. Think of it as the seed packet you hand your good bacteria. And there's a second compound, allicin, that only shows up once you crush or chop the clove and let the air get to it. Whole, an unbroken clove barely smells like anything at all. That's because the compound that becomes allicin and the trigger that sets it off sit apart from each other inside the cell, kept separate until you break something open. Chop it, crush it, chew it, however you break those walls, that's what starts the reaction. During World War II, the Russian Red Army called garlic Russian penicillin. They used it on wounds when their antibiotic supply ran out. Turns out there was genuine chemistry behind that nickname, not just desperation talking. Allicin is the part that goes after harmful bacteria directly. Lab studies have tested it against drug-resistant lung and skin bacteria, and it knocked them back as a vapor without ever touching the clove. That's not folklore. That's a peer-reviewed study out of Germany. Now here's where most people go backwards. They peel a clove, drop it straight in a hot pan, and cook it right away. But allicin doesn't exist in a whole clove. It only forms after you crush it, and it needs a few minutes of air before the heat hits it, or a good part of that antibacterial punch never develops at all. Chop it, let it sit on the board a few minutes, then cook it. Same clove, same pan, completely different chemistry. And that inulin fiber survives the heat just fine either way, feeding your good bacteria, regardless of how you cook it. A study out of Taiwan gave people with sluggish gut chemistry raw garlic juice for a week and found their beneficial bacteria increased, while a harmful metabolite linked to heart disease went down. Promising work, and worth knowing about, not a replacement for anything your cardiologist has you on. One caution, plain and simple. If you're on blood thinners, a lot of raw garlic can add to that effect. Talk to your doctor before you start eating it by the clove. Garlic won't replace anything your doctor's got you on for a genuine infection. I want to be clear about that. What it can do is quietly support the ecosystem doing the day-to-day work in your gut, the kind of everyday maintenance that helps keep bigger problems from starting in the first place. Funny thing about garlic, it's one of the few plants I know that gets more useful the more you damage it. Leave it whole, it just sits there. Break it apart, and that's when it goes to work. Onion, the plainest vegetable in the kitchen, and one of the richest natural sources of that same fiber, inulin, that garlic's got. Here's a number that stuck with me from nursing school and never left. Onions and their whole family, garlic, leeks, chives, sit right at the top of the list researchers use when they're looking for concentrated plant sources of fermentable fiber. Not a trace amount, a real dose in an ordinary vegetable. That fiber travels all the way down to your large intestine undigested because your body doesn't make what it takes to break it apart up top. Once it gets there, your gut bacteria ferment it, and that fermentation is what actually feeds the beneficial colonies. Onions also carry a plant compound called quercetin, which researchers have studied for its effect on inflammation and on certain stubborn stomach bacteria. Early findings, mind you, I'd call it encouraging, not a settled fact. Here's the backwards part. Folks trim off the outer layers and the root end and pitch them, when that's often where the fiber's most concentrated. I toss my onion scraps straight into a stock pot with a bay leaf and let them simmer low all afternoon. Nothing wasted. Raw onion in a salad gives you the fullest dose of that fiber. Cooked low and slow in a broth gets you most of it too. And it's a whole lot gentler if raw onion doesn't sit right with your stomach. There's a reason so many old family recipes start with onion in the pan before anything else goes in. Every culture that figured out slow-cooked, hearty food seemed to land on this same starting point. generation after generation without a single lab in sight. The gas that comes with eating more onion or garlic than you're used to isn't your body doing something wrong. That's fermentation. Plain and simple. Your bacteria breaking down fiber they weren't handling in quantity before. It settles down as your gut adjusts. I've cried over more onions than I could ever count in this kitchen, and I still haven't found a trick that stops it completely. Small price for what's inside. Jerusalem artichoke, also called a sunchoke, and it isn't from Jerusalem at all. It's a Native American sunflower that happens to grow a tuber underground. I want to say I first planted mine along the back fence about 8 years ago now. Might have been 9. Either way, they've come back on their own every spring since. No help from me at all. Stubborn little things. This tuber is one of the most concentrated natural sources of inulin fiber that's ever been studied. A double-blind trial had healthy adults eat snack bars made with it for 3 weeks straight. The result? Beneficial bifidobacteria counts climbed by 1.2 log 10 over 3 weeks, which works out to roughly a 15-fold increase, and populations of a bacteria group linked to gut irritation dropped at the same time. Published, peer-reviewed, straightforward numbers. Roasted, it tastes something like a nutty potato. Boiled and mashed, you'd swap it in for potatoes and barely notice. Here's the one thing to know. Start with a small serving. That fiber ferments fast, and a big first plateful tends to announce itself, loudly. Most gardeners plant it once for the flowers and never eat a single tuber. That's the backwards part right there. A whole prebiotic harvest, left in the ground every single year. Native tribes across the eastern part of this country were growing sunchokes long before any European ever set foot here. French explorers carried them back across the ocean in the early 1600s, and they became a common garden crop across parts of Europe for the next couple of centuries. Fair warning, if you plant it yourself, it spreads. I lost half a garden bed to sunchokes 1 year before I learned to keep it contained in a big half barrel instead. One more thing worth knowing. Sunchokes store beautifully right in the ground through cold weather. No digging up a whole crop at once, no root cellar needed. Just go out with a trowel whenever you want a few. There's something almost comical about a plant nobody planted on purpose turning out to be one of the strongest prebiotics we've got. The garden's got a sense of humor sometimes. Chicory root. This one's got a long history in hard times. During coffee shortages, folks roasted and ground the root as a stand-in, and a lot of old-timers just kept drinking it that way. Turns out that old habit was doing more than saving money. Chicory root is one of the richest natural sources of inulin fiber ever measured, around 40% dry weight by most analyses, which puts it well above the sunchoke we just talked about. The same research that tested Jerusalem artichoke tested chicory root right alongside it, in that same 3-week trial. Both raised beneficial bacteria. Both eased constipation symptoms in follow-up work with elderly participants. Here's where most people go backwards without knowing it. They reach for a coffee substitute for the taste, or to cut caffeine, and have no idea the very thing they're drinking is doing quiet work on their gut bacteria at the same time. Simple, cheap, been sitting in plain sight for 200 years. Ground chicory, root. Ground. Brewed like coffee, or added a spoonful at a time into soups and stews. That's really all there is to it. Go slow the first week or two. That fiber ferments strong, and your gut needs a little time to adjust. There's actually a second chicory most people have eaten without realizing it. Belgian endive, that pale little torpedo-shaped vegetable in the produce section, comes from the very same plant, just grown in the dark so it never turns green and bitter. Between the sunchoke, the chicory, and the onion family we already covered, you've got 3 separate plants doing the exact same fiber job in 3 completely different forms. Variety matters here. Different fiber structures tend to feed different strains of bacteria, not just one. I keep a small tin of ground chicory root right next to my coffee grounds on the counter, and some mornings I mix the 2, half and half. Cuts the caffeine, keeps the ritual, and that fiber's working the whole time I'm drinking it. Dandelion. The one plant on this whole list that every single person watching has pulled out of their lawn at some point, usually swearing under their breath while they did it. Dandelion belongs to the very same plant family as chicory, same inulin fiber, concentrated most heavily in the root, with a smaller amount in the leaves. That relationship isn't a guess. It's basic plant taxonomy. The two are close cousins. Because dandelion hasn't gone through the same large human feeding trials as its cousins, I'll say this the honest way. The evidence here is traditional and observational, not a stack of clinical trials. Herbalists have documented its use for the liver and for digestion for a very long time. The fiber content itself, though, that part's measured and confirmed. Come spring, before the flower opens, the leaves are at their mildest. A little bitter, mind you. Bitterness is doing real work there, too. It's what gets your digestive juices moving before a meal even starts. Here's the backwards part. Plain as day. People spray this plant with herbicide to kill it off, then turn around and buy dandelion root tea at the health food store for $11 a box. If your yard's never been sprayed, young leaves go straight into a salad, a little bitter but good. The root gets scrubbed, sliced thin, and roasted low till it's dark and dry. Dandelion coffee, same idea as the chicory, only ever foraged from ground you know for certain hasn't been treated with chemicals. One safety note, plain and important, dandelion looks similar to a few other yellow-flowered weeds when it's young. If you're not completely certain of your identification, buy it from a shop instead of foraging it. Bitter greens like this one used to be a normal part of the plate, spring after spring, before we started breeding all the bitterness out of our vegetables for the sake of a milder taste. We may have traded away more than flavor in that bargain. My grandmother used to say a lawn full of dandelions meant the soil underneath was healthy enough to feed something, even if nobody planted it there on purpose. I think about that most every spring. Oats. Plain, old-fashioned oats. Not the instant packets with the sugar already stirred in. The fiber that matters here is called beta-glucan, and it's gel-forming. Picture it working almost like a sponge moving through your gut, soaking things up as it goes. A randomized trial compared people eating oats against people eating rice over several weeks. The oat group's cholesterol dropped, and their gut bacteria shifted too. More bifidobacterium, more of a mucus-loving bacteria called Akkermansia that researchers associate with a healthier gut lining. Here's where it goes backwards. Processing breaks down the molecular weight of that beta-glucan. It's still on the label technically, but the gel it forms in your gut is weaker. The fiber effect you're counting on gets quieter the more that grain's been pre-cooked and flattened. Old-fashioned rolled oats, or steel-cut if you've got the patience for them of a morning, that's where the real fiber structure is still intact. I do mine slow, on the stovetop, a little cinnamon stirred in. Nothing fancy. Works every time. Steel-cut, rolled, quick cooking, instant. That's really a spectrum of how much the grain's been cut up and pre-cooked before it reaches your kitchen. Not 4 separate foods. The less processed, the more of that gel-forming fiber tends to survive intact. Oats are also naturally free of gluten, though cross-contamination during processing is common enough that anybody managing celiac disease should specifically look for oats labeled certified gluten-free. Scottish and Irish households have leaned on oats as a daily staple for centuries, long before anybody had measured a beta-glucan molecule under a microscope. Sometimes tradition gets to the right answer well before the lab catches up to it. The FDA actually approved a health claim for oat beta-glucan in heart disease back in 1997, which was fairly early for any food to clear that bar. They set the threshold at 3 grams of beta-glucan a day. That's roughly 1.5 cups of cooked rolled oats, or 1 cup of steel cut, a real, measurable amount, not a trace. I don't think of oatmeal as a health food, exactly. I think of it as the most forgiving thing I can cook on a slow morning. A little cinnamon, a spoonful of ground flax, whatever fruit's sitting on the counter. The gut benefit is just doing its work quietly in the background, same as it always has. Green bananas. Firm, starchy, barely sweet, and that's exactly the point. While a banana's still green, most of its starch is a form called resistant starch. It slides past digestion in your small intestine and arrives intact in your colon, where your good bacteria ferment it into short-chain fatty acids. One of those, butyrate, is basically the preferred fuel for the cells lining your gut. Here's the part that trips nearly everyone up, and it's the whole reason this food made the backwards list. As a banana ripens and turns yellow and spotty, that resistant starch converts into ordinary sugar. The riper, sweeter banana most people wait for is, gut-wise, doing the least. Animal research on green banana flour has shown it can help repair the gut lining after a course of antibiotics and cut down populations of harmful bacteria like E. coli. That work's mostly been done in mice so far, so I'll call it a promising direction, not a proven human outcome yet. Slice it thin and pan-fry it like a plantain chip, or grate it into a stew the way it's done in a lot of Latin American kitchens. Firm and green, not soft and spotted. That's the whole trick. Plantains are close cousins of the banana, and they stay firm and starchy for a much longer stretch before ripening. If green bananas are hard to find at your regular store, a plantain works the same way in most of these dishes. Most grocery stores keep a few green bunches near the back, behind the ripe ones everybody's already reaching for. Ask if you don't see them out. A lot of stores keep extra in back specifically because so few people want them this way. A green banana won't taste sweet, and it isn't trying to. Treat it like a starchy vegetable instead of a fruit, and you'll enjoy it a whole lot more than if you're expecting dessert. Here's the part of the resistant starch story most people never hear. When your gut bacteria ferment it, one of the main byproducts is butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that feeds the cells lining your colon directly, not the bacteria, the cells themselves. It's the reason researchers keep coming back to resistant starch as more than just a prebiotic in the ordinary sense. Boiling a green banana in its skin is the simplest preparation there is. 15 minutes, peel it at the table, eat it with a little salt. That's how a lot of the world outside North America has eaten it for generations. We're the ones who decided to wait for the sugar. Potatoes, the most backwards food on this entire list. And I mean that as a compliment to what happens when you leave one in the fridge overnight. Cook a potato, and most of its starch digests easily. Quick energy, quick rise in blood sugar. But let that same potato cool all the way down, and its starch molecules rearrange themselves into a tighter structure your digestive system can't fully break apart. That's resistant starch forming right there in your refrigerator, free of charge, through a process called retrogradation. And here's the detail most people never hear. Reheating that cooled potato doesn't undo it. Research has found it holds on to the majority of that resistant starch even after you warm it back up. A controlled human trial had healthy adults add one potato side dish to their day for 4 weeks and measured real documented shifts in their gut bacteria compared to a refined grain side dish. So here's the backwards habit, plain and simple. Nearly everybody eats their potato hot, straight off the stove, when it's on the way out the door. Boil it, cool it in the fridge overnight, and eat it cold in a salad, or reheat it the next day. Either way, that resistant starch stays put. Doesn't much matter which variety you start with. Russet, red, gold, they all form resistant starch once they cool. The cooling is what matters here, not the type sitting in your hand. If you're short on fridge time, even a quick 20 minutes in the freezer speeds the same process along, in a pinch. Overnight in the regular fridge is still the most reliable way to do it, though. This same principle, cook it, cool it, eat it cold or reheated, works on rice and pasta too, not just potatoes. Once you understand the trick, it applies to just about anything built on starch. The old-timers in my part of the country kept a bowl of boiled potatoes in the icebox nearly every week and never explained why beyond, they're better this way. Turns out they weren't wrong. They just didn't have the science to back it up yet. One study measured the resistant starch content of a potato at about 1% when it's freshly cooked and hot. Let it cool overnight in the fridge, and that number climbs to around 3%. Reheat it, and it drops back a little, but still sits comfortably above the freshly cooked starting point. 3 times the resistant starch, just from patience. Sweet potatoes work on exactly the same principle. Cook them, cool them, and that orange flesh holds on to more resistant starch than most people would expect from something that sweet. Different color, same cold fridge trick. Apples, about as ordinary as food gets, and I'd bet most of you are eating half of the useful part wrong. The fiber that matters most here is pectin, and it's a soft, gel-forming fiber that your gut bacteria are especially good at breaking down. Researchers studying apple pectin have found it consistently encourages growth of Akkermansia, that same gut-lining bacteria we mentioned back with the oats. A laboratory study using fecal samples from both lean and heavier donors found apple fiber shifted bacterial populations in a favorable direction in both groups and boosted several beneficial species at once. Good, consistent findings, done outside the body, in a controlled model, so I'd call it strong early evidence rather than the final word. Here's the backwards part, and I've done this myself more times than I'd like to admit. Peeling the apple. A good share of that pectin fiber sits concentrated right in and just under the skin. Peel it away, and you're leaving real fiber on the cutting board. Wash it well, skin on, and eat it whole. If you're baking, leave the peel on there too. It softens right up in the oven, and you'd hardly know the difference. Tart varieties, like Granny Smith, tend to test higher in pectin than the sweeter ones. One more reason I keep a bowl of the tart ones on the counter instead of hiding them in a drawer. Store-bought apples sometimes carry a light wax coating on the skin, meant to hold in moisture during shipping. A firm scrub under warm water handles that just fine. No need to avoid the skin over it. Pectin's been studied for its role in cholesterol and blood sugar too, beyond just what it does for your gut bacteria. 2 birds with one ordinary piece of fruit, and it's been sitting in the produce section this whole time. 3 for $1 most weeks. An apple a day won't replace your medication, whatever the old saying implies. What it will do, eaten consistently over weeks and months, is give your gut bacteria a steady, reliable supply of exactly the kind of fiber they run best on. Flaxseed. Tiny, easy to overlook, and it does something almost nothing else on this list can do. Mixed with water, flaxseed forms a thick, gel-like substance called mucilage. It's roughly a third of the seed's total fiber, and that gel is exactly what your gut bacteria ferment down into short-chain fatty acids. A randomized trial gave that mucilage to a group of women for 6 weeks and measured real improvement in insulin sensitivity, along with shifts across more than 30 different bacterial species in their stool samples. Not every single shift pointed the same direction, which is honest, real-world biology, but the overall metabolic picture improved. Here's the backwards habit with this one. A lot of folks reach for flaxseed oil, thinking they're getting the same benefit in a capsule. The oil gives you the omega-3 fats, and that's worthwhile in its own right, but it strips out the fiber entirely. The gut benefit lives in the seed itself, not the oil pressed out of it. Ground, not whole. Whole flaxseed mostly passes right through undigested. A tablespoon of the ground seed stirred into oatmeal or yogurt, that's really all it takes. Grind more than you'll use in a week or two, and it turns rancid fast. Those same healthy fats are the reason it doesn't keep well once it's cracked open. I grind mine in an old coffee grinder, small batches at a time. Flax gave us linen cloth long before anybody ate the seed for its fiber. That pale yellow hair color folks used to call flaxen comes straight from this plant. Same plant, 2 completely different gifts to people, centuries apart. Chia seeds work through a similar gel-forming mechanism, if flax isn't to your taste. Different plant, same general trick, and your gut bacteria are just as happy fermenting either one. Flaxseed also happens to be the richest known food source of lignans, a class of plant compounds your gut bacteria convert into substances that researchers have been studying for their role in hormone balance. That's a separate conversation from the fiber, but worth knowing it's coming along for the ride in the same tablespoon. I keep a small glass jar of ground flax in the fridge door, right next to the butter. Stays fresh longer that way, and it's the first thing I reach for in the morning before I've even decided what breakfast is going to be. A tablespoon goes into almost everything. Lentils, the plainest legume in the pantry, and one of the most studied foods on this entire list. A sizable randomized trial out of Singapore put over 100 adults with early blood sugar trouble on a legume-rich diet for 16 weeks and tracked the results through their gut bacteria directly. Their metabolic markers improved, and the researchers tied a real share of that improvement back to specific shifts in the microbiome itself. Lentils carry both fermentable fiber and a form of resistant starch, similar to what we talked about with potatoes, meaning they feed your gut bacteria on 2 separate fronts at the same time, not just one. Now here's the backwards part, and it's less about the food itself than about how people react to it. Lentils cause gas for a lot of folks the first few times, and most people take that as a sign to quit entirely. Truth is, that's usually your gut bacteria adjusting to a food they haven't seen in a while. Small servings, worked up gradually over a couple weeks, tend to settle that right down as your bacterial population shifts to handle it. If you've got IBS or a diagnosed sensitivity to fermentable fiber, though, that's a conversation for your doctor or a dietitian, not something to push through alone. A half cup, added to soup or rice a couple times a week, works better than a heaping plate all at once, slow and steady, same as most things worth doing. Red lentils cook down soft and almost creamy in 15 minutes flat, no soaking required. Green and brown hold their shape longer, better for a soup where you want some texture left in it. Different jobs, same gut benefit in either way. Canned lentils work fine in a pinch, and they still carry real fiber. Just give them a good rinse first. That rinse cuts down on some of the sodium left over from the canning liquid. Nothing more complicated than that. Lentils have fed more of the world for longer than almost any other single crop we could put on this list. There's a reason this humble little legume has outlasted empires. A pot of lentil soup simmering low on the stove is about as close to a sure thing as cooking gets. Hard to ruin, easy to stretch across a week, and it's carried more hungry households through hard winters than I could ever count. Pomegranate. Messy to open and worth every bit of the mess. The compounds that matter here are called elegitannins, and they're most concentrated in the peel, the thick outer rind most people throw straight away. Your gut bacteria convert them into a metabolite called urolithin A, which researchers have linked to that same gut-lining bacteria, Akkermansia, we've mentioned a couple times today. Here's an honest wrinkle in the research, and I think it's worth knowing rather than glossing over. One human study found only around 70% of people actually carry the right gut bacteria to make that conversion happen at all. The other 30% eat the same fruit and simply don't get the same result. Interesting, humbling too. It's a good reminder that no two guts run exactly the same way. Now, the backwards part. Most people reach for a bottle of pomegranate juice, strained clear and smooth. That processing leaves the pith and much of the peel-adjacent material behind, which is exactly where the elegitannins are most concentrated. Eat the arils whole, seeds and all, straight out of the fruit. If the flavor's too tart on its own, scatter a handful over a salad or plain yogurt. Consistent, regular servings over time may be what helps that conversion happen more reliably. Though I'll say plainly, that part of the research is still developing. Cut it in half first, then hold it underwater in a bowl and pull the arils apart with your fingers. The pith floats, the arils sink, and your countertop stays clean the whole time. A trick I picked up from my grandmother, or maybe it was her sister, one of the two anyway. If wrestling a whole pomegranate apart isn't for you, plenty of grocery stores now sell the arils already separated, in a tub, refrigerated section. Same fruit, same fiber, without the mess on your countertop. Something almost fitting about a fruit this stubborn to open turning out to be this generous once you finally get inside it. Good things aren't always the easy ones. Urolithin A has been attracting a real amount of research attention lately, particularly around muscle function, and what some scientists are calling mitophagy, your cells cleaning out old, worn-down mitochondria and replacing them. Early human trials are underway. I'll say it plainly, this is frontier territory, not settled science. But the direction of the research is interesting enough that I eat pomegranate most weeks regardless. The one thing consistent across the pomegranate research is that frequency seems to matter more than quantity in any single sitting. A small handful of arils most days does more than a large bowl once in a while. Your gut bacteria need a steady supply to keep making that conversion happen. Sauerkraut, cabbage, salt, and thyme. That's the entire ingredient list, and it's been keeping people fed and regular for a couple thousand years at least. Fermentation happens because lactic acid bacteria, mainly a species called Lactobacillus plantarum, move in on the shredded cabbage and convert its natural sugars into lactic acid. That process is what preserves it, and it's also what fills the jar with live bacterial cultures. That landmark Stanford trial I mentioned right at the start of this video, sauerkraut was one of the very foods in that fermented food group, the one that raised microbial diversity and dropped 19 inflammatory markers over 10 weeks, while the high-fiber group barely moved. Here's the backwards part, and it trips up nearly everyone standing in a grocery aisle. Most shelf-stable sauerkraut, the jar sitting unrefrigerated next to the canned goods, has been pasteurized. That heat treatment kills off the very bacteria that made it worth eating in the first place. You're left with cabbage and vinegar. Tasty, maybe. Not alive. Look for it in the refrigerated section instead, and check that the label says it's raw or unpasteurized, with live cultures listed. A small forkful alongside a meal, a couple times a week, is plenty to start. Making your own is simpler than most people expect. Shredded cabbage, measured bit of salt, packed tight in a clean jar under its own brine, left out at room temperature a week or two. Cabbage and salt do the rest of the work themselves. A little fizz or bubbling in a homemade batch is completely normal. That's fermentation doing exactly what it's supposed to. Mold on top, or a smell that's gone truly foul instead of just sour. That's your sign to start over. Sauerkraut salt content is worth a mention if you're watching your sodium closely. A modest forkful alongside a meal is one thing. Treating it as a full side dish every day is a conversation worth having with your doctor. There's a particular smell that fills a kitchen while cabbage ferments. Sharp and a little sour, and I've come to genuinely love it. Took me a couple of batches to get there, though. The lactic acid that sauerkraut produces during fermentation does something useful beyond just preserving the cabbage. It lowers the pH inside the jar enough that harmful bacteria can't survive in it. The good ones are acid tolerant. The bad ones aren't. That's the whole preserving trick, and it's been running without refrigeration for most of human history. Kimchi works on exactly the same lactic acid principle, just with Napa cabbage, ginger, garlic, and chili added in. If you like a little more heat in your fermented foods, kimchi gets you the same live cultures with a completely different flavor. Same bacteria doing the work, different vegetables giving them something to ferment. Kefir. If you've never had it, picture a drinkable yogurt with a bit more tang and a lot more going on underneath. Kefir is made using kefir grains, which aren't grain at all. They're a cluster of bacteria and yeast living together in a kind of partnership. That partnership is what gives kefir a noticeably wider range of live microbial strains than most yogurt on the shelf. Kefir was also part of that same Stanford fermented food group we've circled back to twice now. 10 weeks, rising microbial diversity, inflammatory markers coming down, kefir sat right alongside the sauerkraut and the kimchi in that result. Here's the backwards part. A lot of what's marketed as kefir on the shelf is really a flavored, sweetened dairy drink with a splash of live culture added in, more dessert than fermented food. Added sugar doesn't help your gut bacteria. If anything, it tends to feed the wrong crowd. Plain kefir, unsweetened, with live active cultures on the label. That's the one doing the actual work. A small glass most mornings, plain or with a spoon of fruit stirred in yourself, does more good than a bottle full of syrup ever will. If you're lactose sensitive, don't rule it out too quick. The fermentation process breaks down a good share of the lactose already, and a lot of folks who react to milk do just fine with kefir. Still, if you've got a diagnosed intolerance, it's worth checking with your doctor before you make it a daily habit. Kefir grains, once you've got a batch going, can be reused over and over. Strain them out, drop them in fresh milk, and they get right back to work. A single batch of grains, cared for well, can keep a household in kefir indefinitely. Water kefir is a separate cousin worth knowing about too. Same basic bacteria and yeast partnership, but grown in sugar water instead of milk, for anybody who avoids dairy altogether. Kefir's been a staple in the Caucasus Mountains for so long that nobody's entirely sure when it started, passed down jar to jar, family to family, long before anyone called it a probiotic. I keep my kefir going in a jar on the counter, not the fridge, feeding it fresh milk every day or two, like it's a small, quiet pet that just happens to be good for me. Now 14 foods, but really just 2 jobs. Feed the good bacteria you've already got. Starve out the ones causing you trouble. Most people only ever do one of those, and plenty of folks, without meaning to, aren't doing either. You don't need every single item on this list in your kitchen by tomorrow morning. Pick 2, maybe the cold potato and the plain kefir. Give it a month and pay attention to how you feel. I've watched this kind of small, steady change do more for people over a season than any pill ever managed to. That's not me telling you to throw out what your doctor's prescribed. It's me telling you food is quietly doing more than most of us give it credit for. If anything here concerns you, or you're managing a condition, please bring it to your doctor before you change much of anything. I'm a retired nurse, not your physician, and 30 years at the bedside taught me that the two of us working together always beats either one working alone. I believe the Creator built a body that knows how to heal itself, given half a chance and the right groceries. My job's just to point out which ones. Quick recap if you want the short version. Garlic, onion, pomegranate, and that fermented pear we ended on lean towards starving out the troublemakers. Everything else on this list, the roots, the oats, the banana, the potato, the apple, the flax, the lentils, that's feeding the good ones you've already got. Most people manage maybe 1 or 2 of these on a good week. That's fine. That's still more than nothing, and nothing is where most of us started. 14 foods, 2 jobs, 1 gut, doing its best with whatever you hand it every single day. If this was useful to you, stay a while longer. There's more growing out here than fits in one video. And subscribe if you'd like to walk the garden with me again next time. Here's my garden fence question for you today. Of everything we covered, which one have you been doing backwards this whole time? And which one's going in your cart this week? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one. Whatever's growing near your own back door, plain, ordinary, easy to overlook, take a second look at it before you write it off. You might be standing closer to the answer than you think. Stay blessed, and I'll see you back here soon.